Welcome, everyone, to the Restricted Handling Podcast. You've got myself, Ryan Fugit, once again, former Army officer and former CIA officer, here with our co host and great friend, Glenn Korn, 34 years in U.S. government, most of that at CIA, some at state, some in the Army. Well versed in the government shutdown world and how that works. This is being filmed on the night of October 1st. The government has shut down, and there are a lot of things going on internationally, geopolitically, a lot of security implications, but we wanted to spend a lot of time on Israel and Gaza. So welcome once again.
Thank you, Ryan. Hello to everybody. For all the fans of the Restricted Handling podcast, I should say that I had the pleasure this weekend of spending time with Ryan and his family. If I'm still seem a little bit oozy, it's because the scotch is still wearing off. Very generous. Our host, great spread with great people. So thanks for having us.
It was. We can only do that once a quarter, though. I'm too old to do that any more frequently. All right, Israel and Gaza. There's a lot going on. Obviously, Trump and Netanyahu spoke about a proposed ceasefire, and there are different conditions that I'll just rattle off here briefly, and then we'll talk about implications. From Hamas's side, releasing hostages, relinquishing power, disarming Hamas, technocratic authority put in place, and a board of peace that would be overseen internationally to see what happens. From the Israeli side, release of prisoners, end of the fighting, pull back into a security perimeter, and then administration or allowing humanitarian aid to flow in and reconstruction to begin. Glenn,
Right.
did we miss anything key there that did come up as well?
No, that sounds about right.
You've covered a lot of this before from different places in the world. You're very familiar, as we've talked before, on Turkey. You've spent your fair bit of time working this particular issue. What comes to mind when you hear about this potential ceasefire? And we should have said Hamas has 3 to 4 days to come back on this and decide.
Right. President Trump has said he'll give them 3 or 4 days. So the clock is ticking. There are already some signals coming out from Hamas. I think what's key here, just a couple of points. The main regional leaders in the Middle East and Hamas's main supporters are pushing Hamas to take the deal, including Turkey. For everyone that was tracking, President Erdogan received a very warm reception in the White House by President Trump after the UNGA while he was here for the UN General Assembly, which was a big move. President Erdogan hasn't been in the White House since President Trump's first term. And we had the very scandalous events when his security detail got into a fight with protesters in Sheridan Circle in D.C. He was not invited to the White House during the Biden years, even when he was in Washington for the NATO summit. So President Trump just had him in the White House. That was very important because I think one of the messages Trump had was, and even before that, when he was at UNGA, he spoke with the regional leaders, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, I think the Emirates, the main backers for, I don't want to say Hamas because they don't all back Hamas, but for the Palestinians. And they all came to an agreement that they were going to try to, President Trump said he was not going to allow Israel to occupy the West Bank, which was an interesting statement, and that they were going to support President Trump in his effort to get Bibi Netanyahu to make an agreement. So now the ball's in Hamas's court. I think the indications are that Hamas has said they're willing to consider a deal, but two sticking points. One, they're claiming that they don't know where all the hostages are because some have been taken by, let's say, splinter groups that they don't have control over. And two, they're claiming that they're not going to give up their arms. And I think that's going to be a major sticking point. I don't think the Israelis are going to agree to anything unless Hamas gives up its weapons, which is, by the way, the same situation in Lebanon with Lebanese Hezbollah. And we should touch on that a little bit too, since it's all interconnected.
Why don't we do that now, Glenn? Can you just draw the parallel there? I think this is an appropriate spot.
Sure. So Lebanese Hezbollah, after the Lebanese Civil War, was the only militia that maintained its arms, that was allowed to maintain its weapons. And, since the end of the Civil War, until 2023-24, built up its arsenal. It became a state within a state in Lebanon. Some people would argue that had more weapons than the Lebanese armed forces itself, the legitimate armed forces of Lebanon. And after 2023, the Israelis, when Hassan Nasrallah made the mistake of attacking Israel in support of Hamas, after their horrific terrorist attack on Israel on 7 October, the Israelis opened up what we call a can of whoop, I'm not going to go further. On Lebanese Hezbollah, they did significant damage to the infrastructure, to the weapons storage sites, to the political influence of Hezbollah inside of Lebanon. And now the Lebanese government was, for I think 2+ years, the government couldn't elect a president because Hezbollah politically was blocking the election of a president. Thanks in large part to what the Israelis did, the Lebanese were able to elect a president. They now have a president. They have a prime minister. And over the last, I'd say, 6 months, there's been some progress in talk about disarming Lebanese Hezbollah, which is a demand that the Israelis have, because they don't want an armed terrorist group on Israel's northern border for good reason. The Lebanese state started to talk about what it would do to disarm Hezbollah, but in recent days, I'd say there's been some backsliding in my assessment on their ability to do that, or there's some negative signs coming out of Beirut. And of course, the U.S. government has said that we will not provide any assistance for the reconstruction of Lebanon after its latest war with Israel because of Hezbollah until Hezbollah disarms. And the Israelis continue to strike targets in Lebanon, which is a problem for the government of Lebanon. And of course, they continue to strike targets in Gaza. But our listeners remember that yesterday there was another attack, a rocket attack on Israel from the Gaza Strip. So Hamas also continues, Hamas and its allies, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, continue to attack Israel.
And there's, of course, Reconstruction is one of the parts of this proposed peace deal. And so is Disarmament, as you just called out. So a lot of parallels there. You mentioned hostages, just for the numbers. On October 7th, 1,195 Israelis killed. Count was 251 people taken hostage. Believe that there are 48 still held, and a lot of reporting that I've seen has suggested there are probably 20 alive at this point in time. On the other side, Israel would also have to agree to give up prisoners, and I haven't found a good count on that. It's just numbered much higher than what Hamas has right now, but those would also be released, including folks with life sentences who have been detained.
But I mean, I think that in terms of the hostages, even the bodies of the hostages who have been killed by Hamas, who've died in captivity, the families want those bodies back. President Trump made it clear he wants those bodies back. So that's important to mention, I think.
It is. We were talking about some of the other players here, obviously Turkey, Qatar. Who are some of the invisible veto players in this? Who could derail something like this right now?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And one of the countries that's not part of all these discussions for good reasons is Iran, which has been a supporter of Hamas. So the Iranians could try to derail, and my assessment is, by the way, that the Iranians green-lighted the 7 October attack in 2023 because they wanted to derail, the Abrams Accord and improved relations between, or actually establishment of relations between Israel and some of the key Gulf states and Islamic countries, Muslim countries. Turkey is a big player here. Turkey has influence with Hamas, has had traditionally a good relationship with Israel, but that relationship has deteriorated significantly. And there's a lot of talk, by the way, of tensions now between Ankara and Tel Aviv. Some people going as far as to argue that there could be some kind of military conflict between the two countries. There's competition in Syria for influence, in the Mediterranean over resources, gas, and of course the whole Hamas issue. The Turkish president Erdogan has been very supportive of Hamas, and more importantly, more for the Palestinian people. It's a hot button ticket in Turkey for many voters. And of course, the Israelis have not responded well to some of the claims that the Turkish president and some of his cabinet ministers have made.
Could Iran, you brought up Iran, what could they do now that could destabilize something like this? They just seem so impotent at this point in time in so many ways.
Well, the Iranians continue to funnel money to Hezbollah. I'm sure they're trying to do the same for Hamas. One of the ways that we've been trying to reduce the influence of both organizations, especially Hezbollah, over the past 20 years, is by sanctions, by going after their finances. Of course, the war has really cut down their ability to bring money, financing in. For example, in the case of Lebanon, when the Syrian regime collapsed, the channel that Bashar al-Assad allowed to exist between Iran and Lebanon disappeared, right? It was shut off. And now the Iranians have to find new ways to bring money into support Lebanese Hezbollah. In Gaza, of course, it's a completely different story because the amount of military operations have probably made it very, very difficult for anyone to get money in. Outside of Israel, of course, you have for example, in Qatar, in Turkey, you have representatives of Hamas, and I'm sure they've had some funding. But that's why it's important, for example, that Riyadh and the Qataris are saying, take this deal. And I think they're warning that if you don't, we're going to cut off your funding.
And of course, Israel took a strike in Doha not long ago, targeting Hamas, which was fairly unprecedented. The other thing I had forgot to mention as we were talking about some of the elements of the peace proposal was no Palestinian statehood, which is obviously a significant position to have as Hamas is weighing this decision.
Right.
How important is the reconstruction in terms of who's funding it? If you follow the money, Glenn, is that a big deal? Like who ends up backing it? Would it be one of the Gulf states? Who stands to benefit? Is that not as important at this point in time?
Well, no. It's critically important because, whether it's the Palestinians or whether it's Lebanon, they're going to be reliant on funding from the Gulf states. I don't think Turkey's in a position financially to provide a lot of that funding. And I don't think that this administration is in the mood to provide, billions of dollars of aid and assistance. So I think that the concept has been that we can rebuild Syria, we can rebuild Lebanon, and we can rebuild Gaza with funding and cooperation from the Gulf states. And then in cooperation with the U.S. and, of course, maybe Turkish companies. By the way, I was in New York for a meeting with the Syrian president last week at UNGA. And that was a lot of the discussion, bringing in funding from the Gulf, maybe U.S. companies coming in, Turkish companies coming in to do some of the reconstruction to provide the basic needs, power, water, housing. Fascinating meeting. Very impressive, in my opinion, President El-Shaddai.
Can you speak more about that, Glenn? Or if it's something you can't talk about, that's fine. But
No. I'm happy.
that's a very interesting piece that I'm sure people would love to know. What is that like? What was the purpose? What was the outcome?
Well, I was part of a U.S. Chamber of Commerce meeting with the Syrian president. He was in town. He had multiple meetings, including different organizations hosting him for talks. In our meeting, he talked, he was obviously speaking to U.S. businesses, and he was trying to explain why U.S. companies should come into Syria, what he was doing to try and make the economy or the market more attractive. He talked about he said for years, maybe for the last 60 years, Syria, since its independence, has been a socialist country. And he's trying to make it a market economy. He's trying to bring in some democratic reforms. He needs investment to do that. He just one little note, he mentioned the housing market. Housing hasn't been built in Syria in years. And so he was comparing like a house in downtown Damascus is probably more expensive than an apartment in downtown Manhattan. Or he used Istanbul as an example. And that's because there's just a shortage. And so he's asking construction companies come in to build housing. He talked about the needs, the energy needs. And of course, what Syria has to offer agriculturally, natural resources, rare earth minerals, and then the labor force.
What was it about him personally that was so impressive to you?
It was just interesting to sit with someone who, was a member of al-Nusra. He was fighting in Iraq. He was fighting in Syria. And then, he's in Manhattan. Right?
Was detained, right, at one point.
He was detained. Yeah, he was a guest of the U.S. military. And then
that's one way to put it.
Well, yeah, that's who detained him.
That's right.
Here he is off of 42nd Street in a hotel meeting with a bunch of U.S. business executives. And I just, to myself, I kept wondering, like, what's going through his head when he drives from place to place in, Manhattan. So, and what was impressive about him, he was very measured in his comments, thoughtful. He talked about some of the challenges he's facing. I've heard from other interlocutors that know him that he is very serious about he doesn't want another war. He says the Syrian people are exhausted. They've been fighting for years. They want to rebuild their country and they want to live in prosperity. And he was very complimentary of President Trump and his policy of quickly moving to lift sanctions and kind of recognize El-Shaddai and give him a chance.
Yeah. People like him who have seen war most of their life can appreciate the ability to not have it. If we go quickly back to Israel and Gaza, Why this peace proposal now of all
Why
times?
now? Well, I think President Trump is, he's been trying to get some kind of deal. He would love that. I think for the U.S., it's very important that Israel, the Israelis right now are not in a great position. They're seen more and more as being the aggressor. They're losing public support. They're losing public support in the U.S. And this is a whole other topic. But, after 7 October, Ryan, I wouldn't say stunned, but I was very surprised by the level of anti Semitism that emerged around the world, including in this country. And I've seen it really get very bad here. I think the Israelis are, they have to understand that this war in Gaza is a public relations failure for them. I understand maybe why they're doing what they're doing, but for some people, the assessment is on a big picture, it's not helping Israel or the Jewish community around the world. I think for the White House, that's important for us because many of our issues in the Middle East need to be resolved with, or they're tied to our relationship with Israel, right? We've both seen that in our careers. And we'll just give the example of Turkey. Here's Turkey, which is a major NATO partner. We need Turkey on certain issues, including, to stand with us against Russia right now. President Trump made it clear to President Erdogan the best thing Erdogan could do would be to stop buying Russian oil and gas and reduce commerce with Russia until Russia starts behaving in a more civilized manner towards Ukraine and its other neighbors. And, as all of this is going on, we also have concerns. There are some reports that the Turks are moving troops to northern Cyprus, which is, some people claiming this is all connected with increase in hostilities with Israel. Of course, there's discussions of what's happening in Syria. Could there be a conflict there? And so I think the president, and of course, and the other thing is his kind of key signature diplomatic achievement, I think, during his first term was the Abrams Accord, which, that was even the Biden administration continued, even though they nixed many of the things he did, they kind of continued to try and salvage the Abrams Accord. And I think that this administration really wants to see, a move towards peace in the Middle East.
It's probably worth noting just from not that we're journalists, but from, trying to do our part from the Palestinian side, 400,000 people displaced, 66,000 potentially killed, 170,000 wounded. So certainly a lot of loss on both sides. If this holds, right, Hamas has 3 to 4 days. It's getting close to October 7th, 2-year anniversary. Is that, I would imagine, I don't know, the Israelis probably wouldn't want this to fall on that same day. Is that even part of the calculus, or is this driving motivation to wrap this up at a 2-year mark?
That's an interesting comment. Honestly, I haven't even thought about that, Ryan, but it is coming up on the anniversary, which is a very dark anniversary for the Israelis. And I would say for the world, whenever you have a mass terrorist attack like that. I think, the Israelis probably want this thing over. I know, I would think most Israelis want it over. There's a debate internally, politically in Israel over when to end it, how to end it. But I think the Israelis are probably caught in a position where they want peace, but they also don't want to allow Hamas to maintain its weapons and remain the threat that it has been to Israel, just like they don't want Hezbollah to maintain their weapons and continue to threaten Israel, which they did for years. Most Americans didn't pay attention to it, but regular strikes across the border, kidnappings, assaults, assassinations. So no country wants it. If we had a major terrorist organization on our southern border, we would want to do something about it. As a matter of fact, people are talking about that now. And actually, the administration is trying to do something about it. So, for the Israelis, it's understandable, but they're losing, in my opinion, the information war, the public relations.
It is interesting how some of the news has had to portray Netanyahu's ability to communicate this potential peace deal to his own hardliners and still come out of this. He is fighting a battle, it seems, on his own domestically, really tight line that he has to walk, to your point. And then I would just ask, are there winners that come out of this in your mind, Glenn?
They're winners. I mean, it's hard to say that they'll be, everyone will win if the war stops, if the killing stops. You just mentioned the number of Palestinian victims. Of course, the Israeli victims, it's horrendous. It's hard to say like there'll be a winner other than, long-term, maybe the Palestinians, in my opinion. Because if the war stops, if Hamas is disarmed, because I think most Palestinians and even Gazans don't want Hamas running their lives. It was a terrorist criminal syndicate, right? It wasn't a legitimate government that was running Gaza. Look at what they did with the resources that they have. Many people have said they receive more money in foreign aid than pretty much any country in the world, and most of it was going to buying weapons, building tunnels, preparing for a war with Israel. That didn't really benefit the people of Gaza. So I think if the Saudis come in, if the Qataris come in, the Emiratis, there is investment, there is reconstruction. I want to be an optimist, say that would benefit the Palestinians and it should benefit the Israelis long term. Because when people are living well, it's a lot harder to attract them to extremism.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at where Israel started with this, with Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran 2 years ago, and what it looks like now, it is a very, very different region for them. I mean, they've really pushed the envelope far further than I think most people would have anticipated with some of the strikes. Doha, in Iran, with Hezbollah, with Hamas. It seems like it could be a quieter region for them going forward through a lot of the work that they've done. I don't know. I don't know if you can have a winner in this, though. It's just so much
I mean, if
loss.
you look if you look historically, I mean, what this is all stemming from, it's hard to imagine like a solution, right? The only thing that gives me hope is when we think about, okay, Europe, France and Germany, for example, were at war for years. And eventually they came to some kind of better agreement of like, if we're going to compete, let's do it economically. There's trade between the countries and maybe there's hope of that in the future.
Yeah.
But, even in Europe itself, we have a major war raging right now. So the pessimism is hard to fight,
It's hard.
push.
We started out mentioning that the US government shut down recently. You spent a lot of time in the government. I spent far less, but I did live through a shutdown. How does that impact just our ability to operate when we have so much riding on the line globally right now? Like, what does that do for morale? If you're just talking to people who have never seen inside the gov, what's it like?
Obviously for some people, it's a little depressing. It's concerning, especially the administration is now saying that they may fire people, instead of just being furloughed. When we went through it before, we were furloughed or people were furloughed. I think you and I were probably deemed essential personnel and we had to continue to go to work every day, right? But you can only have certain levels of staffing, funding, different activities get cut, creates all kinds of logistic challenges, confusion. This happens every time. Communication is critical for leaders at a time like this. Managing, one of the hardest things I ever had to do in my job, and many places I serve are very kind of dangerous, volatile places. And you have to tell your team, okay, Johnny, Sally, and Fred, you're essential, but Billy and Bobby, you're non-essential. And that, of course, when you have people like, especially where we worked, when they hear that, that's like a hit because you want to be essential. You want to be on the front line. So this shutdown is obviously causing a lot of confusion, concern. The basic functions of government continue. And I was with a group of guys today, a couple of former SF guys I know, agency guys, and some of them were joking, saying actually when they went through furloughs before, things were more efficient because you have less bureaucracy. I don't know. We went through this in COVID when large portion of the workforce couldn't go to work. But everything continued to function. And some things I would say, in my experience, that actually functioned better because there was less layers. Our colleagues, the people that continue to serve, tend to do it because they believe in the mission. I'm sure they're in the back of their mind, they're a bit worried, like, are we going to get paid? But you get paid. Like Congress actually passed a law that says you have to get paid. And so for all the listeners, they should know that there are people on duty tonight, whether it's at, TSA, ICE, FBI, CIA, DOD, of course, our military, they're still on duty tonight. They're out there doing their jobs. FAA, air traffic controllers, whatever. They're GS-13s that are out doing their jobs and they're working through this. And of course, in the back of their minds, they're wondering how long is it going to last.
Yeah. Anything else, Glenn, on Israel and Gaza that we didn't hit on here?
No, I mean, let's see what Hamas says. I just read in the paper that PIJ, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, they came out and basically made a statement that was interpreted by one newspaper as saying that they didn't outright reject the plan. They said that they will never give up their weapons, but they're open to an agreement. So there's maybe some progress. And let's see where this goes.
Anything notable going on in Russia that we would point listeners to that you've seen over the past couple days?
Well, Ron, when President Zelensky was in New York, he asked President Trump for Tomahawk missiles. The signals from the administration are that they are considering giving that weapon to the Ukrainians. That would be a game changer in many ways because they have it's a long range system that can hit Russia deep inside of Russia. So that's one. Two, the Russian economy continues to deteriorate. They continue to have very significant problems. Those people that argue, and there are those people out there online or in different venues arguing that sanctions don't work, I do not agree with them. Sanctions are having an impact. And of course, the Ukrainian offensive against Russia's oil and gas infrastructure is working. It's having a real visible, tangible impact. And I'd see maybe the last thing on the Russia front, the Russians again did a mass attack on Kiev and other Ukrainian cities earlier this week, right after UNGA ended. All indications are, General Kellogg, the special advisor on Ukraine, came out and said that the administration is lifting the restrictions on use of the ATACMS and other systems to strike deep into Russia. And of course, all of NATO continues to remain very concerned about Russia's movements and activities in the Baltics, in the Baltic Sea, violations of airspace. And I heard, I don't know if this is true or not, but there's a lot of rumors going around that the U.S. is moving a lot of military assets to Europe right now in that direction.
Did you also hear a couple things that Russia has suggested that if Tomahawks go in theater, they might pre-position longer range missiles in Venezuela as a counter?
I did not hear that, but my response to that would be bring it. As well as a whole other topic. I think this administration would love an excuse not an excuse, but a reason to continue to double down on that regime. And the Russians should remember, we didn't invade Venezuela. They invaded Ukraine.
True. Yep.
They can reduce the threat by leaving Ukraine tomorrow.
Yeah, I just mean the whole mirror of Cuban Missile Crisis and putting missiles in people's backyard is amazing that we're here. And the other thing I wanted to mention for folks, you touched on the economy, Glenn. For people listening, I've started with our restricted handling podcast every Wednesday, starting today. So you can go get this. Is a deep dive on Russia and China's economies and the impact of sanctions. So GDP decreases in Russia. Unemployment rate is incredibly low there, but a lot of that is because you have the majority of the workforce fighting on the front lines. So it's a little distorted. Significant increases coming in taxes, both on VAT and utilities. Just corporate borrowing is almost impossible, 17%. This is having a massive impact on Russia. So if you want a deep dive, it's 10 minutes long. It's a great listen. You can find it on Spotify or Apple, wherever you get those.
Yep, I'm glad you mentioned that, and we're doing that because it's very important for people to look at the facts. There are those people out there arguing that sanctions don't work, so we should just lift the sanctions. Let's get this over with. I think that would be a huge mistake until Russia, we should lift sanctions when Russia starts to behave in a way that indicates, let's just say behave better. And that would mean withdraw from Ukrainian territory, stop their attacks on Ukrainian people and other neighbors. They still occupy part of Georgia. They just tried again to meddle in the elections in Moldova.
Yep, and failed, and they're trying to protest that now. Yep.
Right. And they have troops there in Transnistria. It's not just Ukraine, although, of course, Ukraine has been the biggest victim. Yeah.
All right. Who knows what's coming next? Glenn, thanks so much for the time. This was great. Anything else to tell people that they need to know?
No, let's hope this shutdown ends quickly. We hope traffic in Washington, D.C. goes back to normally crazy. So, by the way, your traffic in California, brother, I don't know how you live with it. It was bad. But thank you again to your family for putting up with us. And it was great to see you in person, and hope to see you again soon.